that. That's
try to get to everyone's questions, but only if time permits. For those in the room, if you have a question, please make your way to the microphone just ahead of the stage here. That way everybody will be able to hear your question. For those online, if you have questions, please enter them into the chat, and Tegan will monitor the chat and read out the questions at the end if there is time. So now I'll introduce the speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Tom Kiszczuk, who's Managing Director of TPK Management Consulting. Unfortunately, his presenter, Tato Kao, was unable to join us today. In today's talk, we'll enjoy the non-linear innovative process in engineering and geoscience, highlighting technology-driven innovation and the role of generative AI in accelerating new technologies. So with that, welcome Tom up to the stage.
Thanks, Kevin. I don't think that was quite the title, but it's close. So I am going to talk about AI, but I'm also going to talk about innovation and entrepreneurship. And so where this is going to end is I'm going to show you some output from a tool that we've been using that's an AI tool that we're using to really accelerate the teaching and learning process, but also enterprise development process at the University of Saskatchewan. So great to see some of my classmates from MEC-Eng in '87 in the room, and great to reconnect. So I have a bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering, and I spent most of my career with the Hitachi Power Organization in heavy industrial equipment manufacturing. Spent a few years with Federated Co-op as part of their senior leadership team, and then about 5 years ago took a break and came back doing something that I said I would never do, which was to become a consultant. And so I think I'm doing it in a little bit different way. I have a model where I have multiple clients, and I can move in and out of projects sort of as needed. Gives me some flexibility to do paid work, but also volunteer work. And so this presentation is done wearing my hat as an executive in residence within the College of Engineering at the University of Saskatchewan, within the Ron and Jane School of Professional Development, which was a school that was established several years ago. There is an endowed chair within that school in engineering entrepreneurship. It was funded by the Laborde family several years ago. The person holding that chair, Kevin mentioned, Professor Tate Sau, is not able to join us. He's got a very recent addition to his family and is helping with family today, and he's not able to travel. So within the college's program, it is possible to obtain a certificate in addition to your engineering degree. And so what we're doing in that program under Tate's leadership is to provide courses. There's a set of core courses, and then there's also some experiential learning that we're working on as well. And that happens in the summer, and it's called the Sigma program. And we take groups of students and run them through the methodology that I'm going to be sharing some pieces with you today, and that is called the Disciplined Entrepreneurship Methodology. It comes out of the program at MIT in Boston. That program has existed for about 15 years, and it's led by a person by the name of Bill Aulet. And when I first came across this methodology a few years ago, it immediately resonated with me because Bill Aulet is an electrical engineer. And so he worked with IBM for 11 years and then was involved in 3 startups and then ended up at MIT teaching. And so the method that we call the Disciplined Entrepreneurship 24 Steps, the origin is his teaching notes from the courses that he taught over the last few years. And now he's turned that into a book. And so the materials that I'm going to be talking about come from this book, Disciplined Entrepreneurship 24 Steps. This is the second edition. The revised edition came out about a year ago. It does have a companion to it. It's called Startup Tactics, and that's written by another professor at MIT called Paul Cheek. So they're working together to create this methodology and the materials. Okay, so I'll come to the connection in a minute, but first I have an opening question. And that is, would you build a large structure like the CN Tower with resources that hadn't been educated and trained? Because when we think about innovation and entrepreneurship, I think sometimes we forget the education and training component. So that's what the focus is for the team at USask in this area, is on education. We are a feeder to some of the other processes that happen later on. Okay, so I mentioned MIT, and I'll just mention the relationship. So Tate Sao, when he started in his role in 2018, he had an opportunity to look out and identify what were the methodologies that were being used to teach entrepreneurship at the university level. And so he selected the MIT program. There are many other programs out there. We've seen some of them in our work. And so really that was the start of the connection. And with that relationship being established several years ago, we were invited last year to participate as a founding member in a new international global network called the Global Leadership Entrepreneurship Educators Network. And so there's 5 countries that are part of that. This picture was taken in January this year. You can see me in the top row at the back. There's 5 that joined from the University of Saskatchewan, and we were joined by other participants from countries in Brazil, South Africa, Austria, and Georgia. And with that partnership, and of course there was a cost associated with that, so we had to do some creative fundraising to gather the funds to participate. And through that participation, we have access to educator training, and so that was the purpose of this visit to Boston. We were there for a week to learn directly from Bill Aulet and Paul Cheek, and it was an amazing opportunity that I don't think I'll ever have again, because we're in the classroom. These are very experienced educators. They start by, we're the students, and then they stop partway through and say, well, okay, this is why we do it this way. This is what works. This is what doesn't. This is what I'm thinking about when I'm teaching it. So it was a very enriching experience to understand how this methodology should be taught. We also had seats for students to participate in one of the programs, which is called Start MIT. So we sent down 4 students. And we also have access to an AI tool, which I'll explain later, which is called the Orbit Jetpack. And we have access to the materials. So a lot of the graphics that you're seeing in this presentation are from MIT, and we are using them under license through that agreement. Okay, so I'm going to just, in the next little while, maybe provide a little more on terms of definitions. I'm going to talk about what entrepreneurship is, and then we'll get into some of the methodology. And I'm doing it this way because if we think about an AI tool, we can't just use it. We have to understand where it came from, and we have to understand how it works, because we have to understand what the output is. And when we think about AI tools, I liken this tool, this Orbit Jetpack tool, and I'm dating myself a bit, to when finite element analysis came out. And so when we were in school, we were programming in Fortran on a mainframe computer, but we were taught we can't just accept the output of that program. We have to verify it. We have to verify it. The same applies to AI tools. And so when we see the output, the students have to verify the output. But that creates a learning opportunity for them, because now they're in a mode of agree or disagree and explain why. And so, as I'll talk about a little bit later, it just fills in some of the white space and moves us quicker. Okay, so definitions, many definitions of innovation. This is one definition that we can use if we consider that innovation equals invention times commercialization. And the focus here is that without commercialization, inventions aren't very helpful, aren't very meaningful. And there's a statement that was made by a scientist that I've known a long time ago that I think is similar and maybe emphasizes this. He said, it's not science unless you tell somebody. And so we're doing a lot of things, developing a lot of ideas, coming up with a lot of inventions, but really the innovation comes through the commercialization process that happens as part of that. So this methodology does provide some guidance, some insights in how to move through that commercialization process in a defined way. So when we think about entrepreneurship, one of the areas that I wanted to, I guess, quantify and clarify is the difference between a small and medium-sized enterprise and the difference between an innovation-driven enterprise. Now, the difference is in the graph. So we've got revenue on the vertical axis, and we've got time on the horizontal axis. So if you're considering an SME and you're considering the definition for that as being something like a restaurant or a coffee shop, normally you wouldn't expect to be in a negative revenue position because you're operating using cash flows that are being generated by the business. But if you've got an innovation-driven enterprise, you will very likely have a period where you have negative revenue. And to cover that, you need investment. And so when we talk about innovation-driven enterprises, often we're talking about enterprises that need some sort of funding in their earlier stage, whether that's through bootstrapping, friends and family. Sometimes that's referred to as the three fools, or the three Fs, sorry, friends, family, and fools getting involved very early. Or it could look like venture capital or private equity later on. Okay, and so we've got a short time period in the case of the SME and a longer time period in the case of the IDE. Now, what is entrepreneurship? And I think this is really part of the wisdom of Bill Aulet. He spent a lot of time thinking about this. I think many of us have thought about this, but maybe not in this way. And so if we think that we've got science on one end and we've got art on the other end, in the middle somewhere we've got something that can be considered a craft. And in this theory, entrepreneurship is considered to be a craft. And crafts can be learned, whereas in case of art, that's only achieved by a small group of people, and science is more deterministic. So if it's a craft that can be learned, what does that look like? Well, if we consider that entrepreneurship is accessible, anyone can be an entrepreneur. So who in this room would identify themselves as being an entrepreneur or having an entrepreneurial mindset? Okay, I think there's more than that, because I think we all dabble in this space in different ways over the course of our careers. So anyone can be an entrepreneur. It's learnable. And I should mention that the MIT methodology is based on research. Of course, MIT is a serious university in the US, and they don't do anything without doing some research along the way and understanding what is effective and what is not. So entrepreneurship creates unique products. It's something that's new and it has a positive economic value. It's built on fundamental concepts. And first principles are existing in all of the 24 steps and 15 tactics. Question: what is a first principle? Is there a master list of first principles somewhere? No. And I mentioned Bill Aulet's an engineer, and this is why this methodology resonates with me. First principles are you write down your assumptions. And in first year engineering, what were we taught? In first year design class, write down your assumptions. And that is the first principle. And you do that because if you write down your assumptions, when you do something and come back and look at it later, you understand where you started from. And so this program is not a shotgun approach, and it's not an easy approach. And I really appreciated the messaging from the speaker this morning, Dr. Robin, that we can do hard things. This is not an easy methodology. It is not necessarily sexy or shiny. but it will get us to where we need to go if we're going to build enterprises and if we're going to commercialize inventions. The 24 steps are rigorous, but it does provide a system, it provides a basis for understanding of business, of entrepreneurship, and what needs to be done to make a successful enterprise. Okay, and what we see for sure in the program that we're doing is entrepreneurship is learned through apprenticeship, through practice. So the Sigma program, the Summer Entrepreneurship Program, we call that the safe sandbox. And that's where students have had some exposure to the methodology, but they're coming into the program in a way that they know that they can experiment and that they're free to do that. In fact, they're encouraged to do that at a fairly rapid pace as they walk through the steps of the program. So that's a key part of this as well. It's not only the education, but it's the training component as well. So you may be thinking or asking, so where can you train as an entrepreneur? And that's why I'm saying there are many more entrepreneurs in the room that held up their hands. So you could be an entrepreneur through an early startup company. And maybe that's what we think about when we hear about entrepreneurship. We hear about the incubators, CoLabs in Saskatoon, Cultivator in Regina, and some of the other ones that are in other jurisdictions. Well, that's one way, but you could also be involved in entrepreneurship if you're commercializing a scientific technology. And so historically, this would be called the tech transfer office function within a university. These days it's called other things, but there's opportunities there as well. And there's programs at both USask and the University of Regina that are working on providing education and training to researchers to help them commercialize. You could be an entrepreneurship if you acquired a company. You could be acquiring a company that was maybe an earlier stage company. You could be an entrepreneur if you were part of a corporation and you were doing entrepreneurial work. And this is where I think maybe many of you are involved in this, where you're an entrepreneur, but you're within an existing corporation. So it might not be called entrepreneurship. We would call it intrapreneurship. And then the last one I've got there is entrepreneurship via multinational subsidiary. And so I realized actually that's how I became an entrepreneur. Because I ended up leading one of 900 subsidiaries for Hitachi Limited. In Saskatoon, it was Hitachi Power Systems Canada. And that's where I was exposed to all of the various aspects of a business and what that looks like. And so many ways to get training as an entrepreneur and many ways to develop capabilities in that area. Okay, so next we're going to move into the 24 steps. I'm not going to get into detail on all of these. I am going to pull out a couple and do a little bit deeper dive that I think are relevant to consulting companies, to manufacturing companies. There are a number of the 24 steps that we joke as an education team that we really wish that we had this information years ago because we really didn't understand what we were doing around customer acquisition. But if we had this approach, it would have saved us a lot of money and time. So the 24 steps can be broken down into 6 themes. This first theme is, who is your customer? In the summer program, it's a 3-month program. We spend the first month on this theme, focusing on something called PMR, Primary Market Research. And what is that? That's figuring out who your customer is, finding them, and talking to them. And it's always interesting in that part of the program to see people struggle with that. But we do get some feedback at the end of the program, and it's consistent across the years. This will be the 6th year we're running the program. The number one thing that they say that was most valuable in the program is that we forced them to talk to customers. Because that's not something that as technical people we think that we have to be doing. But if we're working as an entrepreneur, we have to understand who our customers are. So where are they? How can we get a hold of them? How can we communicate with them? Okay. The second theme is what can you do for your customer? And so in technical programs, we have a tendency to focus on thinking that we have the solution without actually understanding if that problem needs to be solved. And you find out whether or not that problem needs to be solved by talking to the customer, using primary market research, using open-ended questions. And so what we teach the students is that when they're going into a conversation with a potential customer, they shouldn't be offering their solutions at that point in time. They should be asking, what are their problems? What does their day look like? What do their projects look like? Because if it's a problem that doesn't need to be solved, it's going to be pretty hard to generate revenue from that. Okay. The third kind of bucket that we can talk about here is how does your customer acquire your product? And this relates to the decision-making unit and the customer acquisition process. I'm going to come back to that in a bit. The fourth theme is how do you make money off your business? So what's the model? What's the pricing? What's something called the lifetime value? What is your customer going to pay over the long term? And what's the cost of your customer acquisition? And so the rule of thumb is that if your lifetime value is not greater than 3 times the cost of customer acquisition, you shouldn't be doing it because you're not generating enough revenue to cover your costs. And so that cost of customer acquisition, how it presents itself in the financial statements is usually as an administrative expense. You've got people out in the field attending trade shows, tracking down customers, so that's a cost to the business. And so if you can't connect with those customers easily and quickly, those costs can get quite high. The fifth theme is how do you design and build your product? Okay, so we're on the fifth theme, and now we're talking about designing and building the product. So there's a lot of work done here to figure out who's your customer, what do they need, how are they going to find you? And then the sixth bucket here is how do you scale your business? Okay, and so you got to look at what those opportunities are. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the 24 steps. This is the 15 tactics next. Again, these can be broken down into a few groups. I'm not going to get into detail here because we don't have time. I just want to make you aware that there is a companion to the methodology that was developed in conjunction with it. And this is really more related to how do you establish a business, how do you get it going, what are some of the tactics that you need to consider to do that. And so there's some foundational pieces that need to be considered. There's some market testing pieces that need to be considered, and there's some great ideas and hacks within that book for market testing. There's product development, and then there's resource acquisition. So that's really building the team and creating the organization. Okay. So I just want to point out here, and I've kind of touched on it already, is that these steps and tactics are not just for startups. That's where it started with MIT. And we asked Bill Aulet in January when we were there, why is he focusing on startups? Like, why not deep tech? Why not other commercialization opportunities? And his answer was, with startups, you're starting with a blank slate. And so you can build these enterprises the right way using a defined systematic methodology. And it's easier from a teaching and research perspective to understand what's working and what's not. But I know because of involvement and because of other observations that there are many other applications for this methodology. And so that could be custom manufacturing. I mentioned I wish I would have had these tools a long time ago. We never had a good enough understanding at Hitachi when we were quoting or making proposals to supply pressure vessels and heat exchangers. And it's because we hadn't spent enough time to understand who our customer was. And it was because we were separated. We're 2 or 3 levels away. So typically we would quote to an EPC, but sometimes the EPC hadn't been awarded the contract yet. And so we would, in the earlier days, as we struggled to figure this out, we would quote to one EPC, and then we wonder why we didn't get the job. Well, it's because the EPC didn't get the job. There were 4 or 5 EPCs quoting on the project. And so, with that understanding, you can be more effective in terms of the cost of that customer acquisition. I would suggest that it could apply to engineering consulting as well. Part of my work at the university allows me to do some experimenting. I do typically on a volunteer basis help people who are starting consulting businesses. Some of those are in the engineering space, and I'm challenging them to apply this methodology to what they're doing. And we're gathering some information and getting a better idea what that's going to look like. Regional economic development is another space. MIT has done a lot of work in this area and has done for many years. They have a program called REAP, which is Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program. Edmonton is just embarking on that program, but it's been used globally. Of course, early stage companies and deep tech commercialization are another couple areas. Okay, so I'm going to do a bit of a deeper dive into a couple pieces here, and I'm going to warn you, in a few minutes, you're going to do an exercise. So pay attention. So in the decision-making unit, this is the unit that's deciding whether or not they're going to purchase your product or service. Okay? There is a cast of characters in that unit. And they range from the people who are involved in the operations all the way up to the CEO. And if you don't understand that that unit is comprised of multiple levels within an organization, that's when you put something on the CEO's desk and say, "Hey, boss, we got the order." To which I would say, "No, he didn't. It's not signed by the customer yet." Because it's not an order until it's signed by the CEO of the customer. Because what happens invariably is that the people in your business development team are told that they're getting the order, but they don't recognize that the person that they're talking to doesn't actually have the authority to bind the corporation to give you that order. And that there's another series of approvals and steps that go around in order for that final decision to be made. And so you've got your economic buyers, you've got your end users within those projects, and you've got your champions, but you've also got people that hold the veto. Okay, so if we consider that these are the definitions of that decision-making unit, you've got the end user who's actually using the product or service, you've got the economic buyer who's going to pay for it, you've got the champion, they see the value in various ways, but then you've got the veto holder that can decide not to proceed with the order. And sometimes those veto holders are not who you'd expect. Often that could be the human resources department. Because if what you're trying to sell to this company is going to reduce headcount within the organization, that can be problematic if there's collective bargaining agreements in place that need to be followed. And so it's necessary to understand sort of what that decision-making unit looks like and how that's all fit together. And I would suggest that some of the most successful business people in various places have figured that out, and they focus on developing and maintaining relationships with those high levels within the organization, because they gain an understanding of who can actually make that buying decision. Okay, so with that, I gave you some definitions. And so I just want you to do a bit of an exercise. I don't want you to share this with anybody. Don't share it with me. Just think back into your own work. So for a product or service that you sell, I just want you to write down the name of who you think the end user is, who's the economic buyer, who's the champion, and who holds the veto power. Okay? So for a product or service that you're selling, or offering, depending on your organization. Pick something and then think about that decision-making process and try and identify who those people actually are. Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, so we'll come back. So how did that feel? Is that something that you would normally do in your course of business? To plan how you're going to sell something? So yes and no. So we do this in our daily work. We're always planning, but we may not be thinking of it in this particular way. But I would suggest that we always need to be planning regardless of the activity that we're doing. Okay, so within the methodology, there's a customer acquisition process. There's a map that we can generate. The one piece that I want to talk about here is something called the window of opportunity. And we need to pay attention to this because things happen in cycles, particularly in large organizations. They have fiscal years, and that planning process is an annual process. So part of my time was at Federated Co-op, large organization. That process went on all year long. Budget was approved end of September. Fiscal year started November 1st. Guess what we were doing in November? We were planning for the next year. And so that means that the budgets are set once a year, they're approved once a year, so funding is available once a year. And it's planned out over the year. So if you're coming in and trying to do something and it's not in the budget, it's very difficult to move through that. But if you understand what the fiscal year is for the organization, you get a better sense of what the timing for your activity should be, and you can utilize your resources more effectively to understand when that opportunity could actually exist. So it could be related to the size and scope of procurement package, fiscal year, as I mentioned, the sourcing policy, and regulatory change. What's happening, what's not happening, what does that look like from a window of opportunity point of view? Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. A couple examples of drilling down a little bit deeper into that methodology and how it might apply to what you're doing. So next I wanted to introduce the Orbit Jetpack. So this was a tool, or is a tool that's being developed at the Martin Trust Center at MIT. So they started work about 2 years ago. Because this tool is being used by university students, there was a lens of IT security on it, which was good, because the IT folks asked some pointed questions like, where's the data stored? Are you training the model? And so the answers in this case are that this tool is a contained tool. It is loaded with all of the teaching materials, all of the case studies, all of the other information that's been generated by the program over the last 15 years. It's not going out to the internet to look for information. As such, because this program is developed in the Northeast US, a lot of the output really doesn't apply to Canada or Western Canada in particular. And so that's where the interpretation is needed. And as of January, about 10,000 users at about 200 universities and incubators around the world. Okay, so I had hoped that I would be able to demonstrate the tool, but we don't have the technology to do that, but that's okay, because I'm just going to do a demonstration that was done in advance. And so within that tool, which is a web page, you need a login, you need permission to be using it. What you're doing is you're entering a prompt into that system. So this is a prompt that I put in to develop this presentation. So engineering services for design of commercial spaces for complex heat and mass transfer requirements. Okay, that's the input. Now the output is against the 24 steps and the 15 tactics. Okay, so if we look at the output for the decision-making unit, this is what the output looks like, and I know it's very difficult to read, but I just wanted to demonstrate that this is the output that's produced from that tool. To generate output across all 24 steps and 15 tactics takes about 15 minutes. And so it is a way to accelerate some of the foundational work that you need to do to look at an idea to see whether or not it makes sense. And within the tool, within the output, as I mentioned, within the education component of that, we're using it as part of the teaching methodology now to generate this output and have the students go to a whiteboard in somewhat random groups and basically figure out whether or not they agree or disagree with the output, as a way to get them to understand first the methodology, what is the concept that's being taught, but also, you know, that ability to discern and make a decision on whether or not that's acceptable or it's not acceptable. The value that we see over and over again is it fills in the white space. And it's a starting point. And if we think about this, when we're starting on a problem and we don't know where to begin and we're just starting with a blank page, it takes us a long time to figure out where to start. But if we've got a tool that gives us a starting point, we can move much quicker. So I didn't ask the question before, but I'll ask again. Who here is using AI regularly, like daily in their work? ChatGPT or another tool? Okay, so quite a few of you. So I think you understand where I'm going with this. It's a starting point, right? One of the first prompts I put into ChatGPT was write me a health and safety policy. It was pretty good the first time, and then it got worse and worse and worse. But it was good the first time. That was very at USask. Then I've got a short survey that I'd like you to do because we would like to understand how we can better support you through the work that we're doing. So this session is a great opportunity for us to do some market testing, to understand whether or not these types of concepts are helpful to the engineering profession. And it's part of our mandate within the programming to now start to look out beyond the program in terms of professional development. And we are in the process of doing primary market research to understand whether or not professional development or continuing education is an area that we should be offering moving ahead. Okay, so final thought, why would you design and build a business with resources that had not been educated and trained? So hopefully you're understanding the value of stepping back and applying some education and training as we work through these processes. Okay, so within the programming, and maybe I'll explain the corners of the slides a bit. So the program at series of hackathons in the year. We've done 4. This year we did an internal hackathon for students in October who were in their capstone classes so that they could focus their ideation a little bit quicker, because it's always November and they haven't picked an idea what they're going to work on. And then I tell them, you're graduating in April, you need to get going on this. We did a hackathon on mining that was a partnership with the International Minerals Innovation Institute and SIMSA, the Saskatchewan Industrial Mining Suppliers Association. And so the problem set for that hackathon came from the IMII Demo Day, came from industry. So we had the students work through that. We did a hackathon on nuclear energy, and that was a student-led hackathon by the Sask Invent team at the University of Saskatchewan. They initiated it. They came up with the idea. They put it on, put it all together. We provided some technical support. And then we also did a hackathon a few weeks ago in the ag space, and that problem set came from various places. So that's another inspirational type event. Then there's the exploration, the boot camps, the tools, the speaker series, and then there's the foundational components, which is really the classroom learning. So the key course there is the top one, 431, 831. It's a grad, undergrad class. And then there's some other components that are part of the certificate program. Certification in terms of tech innovation, and then acceleration, which is the Sigma Lab. And so we do now have an understanding of where we fit into that ecosystem. I would say 2-3 years ago, we didn't. We now understand that the role of what we're doing there is education. And when we run the Sigma program, it is not the goal of the program that these teams are creating enterprises at the end. The goal of the program is that they are developing the tools and practicing with the tools that will be helpful whatever they do. And having employed and hired and employed many engineers over the course of my career, I was always looking for somebody with an entrepreneurial mindset, and they're few and far between, I think, until the last few years as we've focused more on the educational component. Because regardless of the business or organization that we're in, we're selling to somebody or something. And so having that understanding, that business understanding, that entrepreneurial mindset is helpful in my opinion. Okay, so with that, very short survey for you. We just want to gather some information to understand how we can better support the engineering profession as we move forward with the work that we're doing. So with that QR code, it should come up with a link. If you could just take a moment to complete that survey, that would be great. I see people inputting, so looks like the link is working. Good. Thank you for your input. And I just want to leave you with a final thought. And this actually came from Bill Allett, and it just made a lot of sense. Let's remember that the gold is in our heads. It's not with somebody else. The value that we're providing to our customers comes from what we learn, what we practice, and what we think about. And for me, this resonates because I am in my I call it my third phase of my career. I worked with one organization for 26 years, another for 5, and I've been consulting for 5. And the fear of becoming a consultant, a lot of it for me was the stuff I'd done, was it going to be helpful or useful for other people? And I would suggest that yes, it is. And in my case, it's probably around 95%. I can always reflect on an experience that I've had in the past and adapt it for another use that's valuable for somebody else. So let's just remember that the gold is in our heads, and we have the ability to share that gold with others and create value for other organizations. Okay, and with that, Kevin, I think we have some time for questions. Yep. Okay.
Just reminder to the microphone.
Go to the mic if you'd like to ask a question. You can ask me anything.
This AI software you talked about, the Orbit Jet, is it like open to use? Anybody can go and register?
Not at this time. So it's open to anybody that has a University of Saskatchewan email address.
Okay.
or an NSID. That may change moving ahead. That may expand to the University of Regina or to others. Yeah, but because we're under a license agreement, it's not completely open. Yeah.
And what are the capabilities of this AI?
So to really just to generate an output against the steps and the methodology,
Okay.
as a way to understand what the meaning of the concepts is, and sort of where to start the process against each of those steps.
Can be used by a tech startup.
Can be used by anybody. Yeah. If you want to explore an idea related to whether or not this could be a business, then that would be an application for it. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering,
We'll get you to go to the mic because the people online won't be able to hear you. Yeah. Perfect.
just wondering what the relationship is with Glean. That's quite a mix of countries, Canada, Brazil, South Africa. Like having that diversity of participation, and then the AI itself, I understood, is sort of limited right now to Northwest United States, or like, how are you connecting the dots between sort of the collective information that the AI is using and
Yep.
the participants within
Yep.
Glean?
So on the data set component, I should be clear, the original data set is from the northeastern US. Part of the reason why we were given access to the tool a year ago was part of the pilot, because they knew that they needed to have the model learn from other regions in the world. And for us, that's the real opportunity, is to adapt this approach to a jurisdiction that's resource intensive, because that's not the northwest or northeast coast of the United States. And so we were involved in the first pilot. Now on the Glean side, I mentioned the REAP program, the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program. One of the things that MIT is very good at is commercializing what they're doing. And so they have been offering the REAP program, which is a regional economic development program to various countries, locations throughout the world for more than 10 years. And so this network, in some ways, we're kind of the exception. There's 5 of us. The other 4 have come up through this regional economic development program. But MIT wants to have some diversity within that group. And so in some ways, the focus of the GLEAN is to help those participants establish ecosystems for entrepreneurship or for innovation. And so if you go on the MIT website, look under the REAP programming, you'll see some examples of what that's looking like. So in the case of Edmonton, they're just embarking on this journey. I think they're part of the 11th cohort. And so they're going to use that framework to help them understand how they first can identify the players in the ecosystem and how they can bring them together in a systematic way to drive economic development in that region. So it's connected to that. Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the opportunity within Saskatchewan. It seems we do a good job of training people that create opportunities outside the province.
Yeah.
What do you see, like, what is your thoughts on
Yeah.
entrepreneurship in Saskatchewan, areas of opportunity?
So there are a lot of opportunities, and I think in the first interaction that I have with the student groups, I encourage them to read the textbooks. I held them up. They're not big books. But I explained to them, until we have a common language so that we can understand each other and transfer information, this is going to be harder than it needs to be. And so the methodology is providing that common language. I use some of it. Decision-making unit. What does that mean? Well, that's what it means. I think the challenge that we have in the province, and this is an area that I am doing some work in various ways, is that we don't have an understanding of what is the currency of innovation. Is it what can be referred to as the metrics from the tech industry? Sometimes they're called vanity metrics because they're focusing on the wrong things. They're focusing on number of jobs created. Those jobs are temporary. They're focused on dollars investment. That's not revenue. And so we've got that part of it, and that's a valuable part of the ecosystem. But I think along the way, we've maybe we've forgotten about some of the other components of our economy. And so I mentioned my background is from the manufacturing side. In the manufacturing business, there's a huge amount of innovation that goes on, because if you're not innovating, you're not remaining competitive. So the operation in Saskatoon was competing globally. Only about 10% of our sales were within the province. The other 90% was either other parts of Canada, but often internationally. And so we had to be innovating, but that also meant that we had to be investing. And so I recently had an opportunity to reflect more on that, because I'm reading the work of a professor from the University of Toronto called Dan Bresnitz, who's actually made a presentation in the province a couple of weeks ago as part of a session at the Johnson Toyama Graduate School. And so he brought forward some different kind of ideas around innovation, but I now understand what I was doing in a Japanese company. So under that definition, we were both an OEM, original equipment manufacturer, and an ODM, an original design manufacturer. And our goal was always to create our own product that we could sell to others, to white label. And we had some success in that. And so the example that Dr. Bresnitz gives is Shenzhen, China, because that is ground zero for that kind of activity. And that's why the US is facing the challenge that it is, because it doesn't have capacity to innovate in manufacturing to the same level that now exists in other parts of the world. And so there's an area to catch up. But the other thing that kind of resonated with me, and that's, I'll use this as a comparison to the high-tech world. In manufacturing, you have to be profitable, but you have to put those profits back into the business. And I would say one of the achievements that we had at Hitachi was that we were generating sufficient cash flow that we were able to reinvest in the business. So over the course of 25 years, our total capital investment was about $80 million. $2 million was the starting capital, and we had $10 million along the way from the parent company after an amalgamation. The rest of it came from operating cash flow. So if we think about building the economy and what's important to the economy, I think we need to pay attention to sort of those cash flows and what happens with them. But I also think that we need to pay attention to the types of occupations that are employed by these operations. And if we look at a high-tech operation, there's a very specific skill set that's involved in those businesses. In a manufacturing business, there's a very wide range of skill sets that are involved in that business. It's different ways to think about innovation. So yes, we do need to think about innovation in a different way in the province. And I think there's opportunity to do that as we move forward. So, yeah. Thank you for the question. All right.